The message from Earth reached the stars 300 years ago. It was simple. It was hopeful. It said that humanity wanted to be friends with whoever was listening. Scientists sent music and art and pictures of children playing in parks. They broadcast the location of their world like an invitation to a party. They believed the whole universe would want to attend. The universe was listening. It just did not care. The Galactic Concord was an alliance of 12 ancient species who had ruled the stars for longer than humans had existed. They watched the little blue planet with mild interest, the way a person might watch an ant building a hill in their garden. The humans were primitive. They were emotional. They were not worth the effort of a response, so the Concord said nothing. For 300 years, they watched humanity reach out with open hands, and they let the silence answer. Admiral Lisa Morgan was 47 years old when she learned what that silence really meant. She was standing on the bridge of the ESS Resolute, reading reports from the colony on Kepler 44b, when the first distress signal came through. The words were broken by static and screaming. The Velthari had come without warning. Their ships appeared in the sky like metal demons, and they began burning everything below. The colony had no weapons. They had no shields. They had nothing but farming equipment and schools and hospitals and 14 million people who had never hurt anyone. Lisa watched the video feeds until she could not watch anymore. She saw families running through streets filled with smoke. She saw a mother trying to shield her baby with her own body as fire fell from above. She saw a little boy standing alone in a burning field, calling for parents who would never answer. The Velthari finished their work in 6 hours. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but ash and silence. The Galactic Concord sent their first official message to humanity the next morning. It was written in the formal language of diplomacy, filled with words that meant nothing. They expressed concern about the incident. They suggested that humanity might have provoked the attack by expanding into territory the Velthari considered theirs. They offered to arrange a meeting where both sides could discuss their differences. They did not offer help. They did not condemn the attack. They did not even call it what it was, Secretary General Daniel Price read the message in front of the United Nations Stellar Council. He was an old man with white hair and kind eyes, the sort of leader who had spent his whole life believing that patience and goodness would eventually win. When he finished reading, he set the paper down and looked at the assembly. They watched, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. Every species in that Concord has sensors that can see across the galaxy. They knew what was happening. They saw our people dying, and they did nothing. A woman in the back row stood up. Her name was Maria Santos, and she had lost her sister on Kepler 44b. What do we do now? She asked. Daniel Price was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The kindness was still there, but underneath it was something harder. Something that had been born in the ashes of 14 million graves. For 300 years, we believed that if we were good enough, the universe would be good to us. We thought that kindness would be answered with kindness. We were wrong. He paused and looked around the room. We will not make that mistake again. The vote was unanimous. Every nation on Earth agreed. Every colony in human space sent their support. Humanity would no longer wait for the galaxy to accept them. They would make their own place among the stars. In the shipyards orbiting Mars, construction began on new vessels. These were not exploration ships or cargo haulers. They were warships, built with technology that human scientists had been developing in secret for decades. Engineers worked day and night, sleeping in shifts, pushing themselves beyond exhaustion, because they all remembered what had happened to Kepler 44b. Lisa Morgan was promoted to Fleet Admiral and given command of the 1st Expeditionary Force. She stood in front of her officers on the day they launched and spoke words that would be remembered for centuries. We did not choose this war. We did not want this war. But they brought it to us anyway, and they thought we would accept it. They thought we would bow our heads and ask for mercy. They thought we were weak. She let the silence stretch. They were wrong about us, and we are going to show them exactly how wrong they were. The Concorde sent another message as the human fleet gathered. This one was less polite. They demanded that humanity stand down its military buildup. They warned of consequences if humans continued their aggressive actions. They used words like peace and stability, as if those words meant anything to the people who had watched their children burn. Daniel Price recorded his response and broadcast it on every frequency in known space. His face was calm, but his eyes held a fire that had not been there before. You had 300 years to talk to us. 300 years to welcome us as equals. 300 years to show us that the galaxy was not as cruel as we feared. Instead, you watched our people die and called it a diplomatic incident. He leaned forward. That time is over. You do not get to decide when we stop. You do not get to tell us what peace means. You lost that right when you chose silence over justice. The message ended, and humanity began its march to the stars. On the memorial grounds of Kepler 4b, workers had begun carving names into walls of black stone. 14 million names. It would take years to finish. But every human who saw those walls would remember why they were fighting. Lisa Morgan visited the memorial before her fleet departed. She walked along the walls until she found the names she was looking for. A woman and her baby, killed together in the first hour of the attack. She did not know them. She had never met them, but she made them a promise anyway. We will make them answer for this, she whispered. Every species that watched and did nothing. Every empire that thought our lives were worth less than their comfort. We will teach them that human beings are not to be ignored. She returned to her ship and gave the order to move out. 400 vessels followed her into the darkness between stars, carrying soldiers who knew they might not come home. They were not afraid. They were angry, and the galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity stopped being patient. The Velthari Empire had ruled 47 star systems for longer than human civilization had existed. Their warriors had conquered 6 species before the first human learned to make fire. Their generals spoke of war the way artists speak of painting, as something beautiful and natural that they had perfected over thousands of years. When they heard that humans were coming, they laughed. High Commander Zeleth stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the human fleet approach Threshold Station. Threshold was the gateway to Velthari space, a fortress that had never fallen in 10,000 years of war. Its shields could stop 1,000 missiles. Its weapons could destroy a moon. Behind it waited 800 Velthari warships, each one crewed by soldiers who had been trained since birth to kill. How many human ships? Zeleth asked his tactical officer. 400, High Commander. Zeleth made a sound that was the Velthari equivalent of a smile. They send 400 ships against Threshold. Either they are brave or they are stupid. Perhaps both, High Commander. The Velthari fleet arranged itself in the formation they had used for centuries. It was a perfect formation, developed over generations of warfare, tested against every enemy they had ever faced. No species had ever broken it. Admiral Lisa Morgan studied the Velthari formation on her tactical display. Beside her stood Commander Kevin Park, a young officer who had grown up on a colony just 2 systems away from Kepler 4b. He had lost friends in the attack. He had not smiled since. They are using a standard defensive pattern, Kevin said. Our analysts have seen it in their historical records. They used the same formation against the Vesseled 3,000 years ago. Lisa nodded slowly. They think we are like everyone else they have fought. They think we will behave the way other species behaved. Will we? Lisa turned to look at him, and there was something cold in her eyes. No, we will not. The battle began at exactly 0600 ship time. The Velthari expected the humans to approach in waves to test their defenses, to probe for weaknesses the way civilized species always did. Instead, the human fleet scattered like a flock of birds and attacked from every direction at once. Velthari tactical computers struggled to track targets that moved in patterns no species had ever used before. Human ships darted between enemy formations, firing weapons that punched through shields like they were made of paper. Missiles that the Velthari had never seen before exploded with energy that blinded their sensors. High Commander. Zeleth watched his perfect formation collapse in minutes. Ships that had never been damaged in 100 battles were torn apart by weapons that should not exist. Crews that had never known defeat died, screaming as human warships cut through them like knives through cloth. "What are they doing?" Zelith demanded. "This is not how war is fought." His tactical officer did not answer. He was too busy trying to track the human ship that was heading directly for the flagship. On the ESS Resolute, Lisa Morgan gave orders in a voice as calm as if she were ordering dinner. She had studied the Velthari for months. She knew their tactics, their weaknesses, their arrogance. She knew that they had never faced an enemy who refused to play by their rules. "All ships, execute Pattern 7, she said. "And someone tell Commander Park that he is clear to begin the boarding action." Kevin Park was already in the shuttle bay, surrounded by 500 Marines in powered armor. The armor was another human invention, a suit that could stop plasma fire and let a single soldier fight like 10. The Marines checked their weapons and said nothing. They all knew what they were about to do. The shuttle launched through the chaos of battle, dodging fire that would have destroyed any normal vessel. It slammed into the hull of Threshold Station, and the Marines cut their way inside. The Velthari defenders fought hard. They were brave soldiers who had trained for this moment their entire lives, but they had trained to fight enemies who were slower, weaker, less determined. They had not trained to fight humans. Kevin led his Marines through corridors filled with smoke and screaming. His armor took hits that would have killed him a dozen times, and he kept moving. When a Velthari warrior blocked his path, he killed it and stepped over the body without breaking stride. They reached the command center in 37 minutes. The station commander was inside, surrounded by his last defenders. He was an old Velthari named Cassith, a veteran of wars that humans had never heard of. He looked at Kevin Park with eyes that held no fear, only confusion.
"How?"
Cassith asked. "We have fought 1,000 species. None of them fought like you." Kevin removed his helmet so the alien could see his face. He wanted Cassith to understand that he was not fighting a machine or a monster. He was fighting a human being who remembered what had happened on Kepler-4 for to be. "You burned our colony," Kevin said quietly. "You killed 14 million people who had never done anything to hurt you. And then you expected us to accept it." Cassith was silent for a long moment. "We thought you would negotiate." "All species negotiate. We are not all species." Kevin raised his weapon. "We are human, and we remember." The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, Threshold Station belonged to humanity. 800 Velthari warships had been destroyed or captured. High Commander Zelith was dead, killed when his flagship broke apart under human fire. The Galactic Concord received news of the battle within hours. For the first time in recorded history, all 12 species called an emergency meeting. They argued for 3 days about what to do. Some wanted to intervene. Some wanted to sanction humanity. Some suggested that perhaps they should have helped the humans when they had the chance. While they argued, Lisa Morgan led her fleet deeper into Velthari space. 7 more systems fell in the next 2 weeks. The Velthari fought at every step, but they were fighting an enemy they did not understand. An enemy who did not follow their rules. An enemy who had stopped being patient a long time ago. On the Velthari homeworld, Empress Thelena addressed her people. She was ancient by Velthari standards, a ruler who had overseen 100 victories. Now she spoke words that no Velthari leader had spoken in 3,000 years. "We are losing," she said. "Against a species we thought was primitive, against a people we attacked without mercy, we were wrong about them. We were very wrong." The surrender came 47 days after the war began. The Velthari gave up every claim they had ever made. They returned every prisoner. They agreed to pay for the rebuilding of Kepler-4 for to be, though no amount of money could bring back the dead, and still, humanity did not stop. Lisa Morgan received the surrender documents on the bridge of the Resolute. She read them carefully, signed them, and handed them to her aide. Then she looked out at the stars that humanity had finally claimed. "This is not over," she said quietly. "The Velthari were only the beginning. The whole galaxy watched our people burn and did nothing. They all need to understand that there are consequences for that silence. Her aide nodded slowly. "Where do we go next, Admiral?" Lisa did not answer immediately. She was thinking about the black walls on Kepler-44 to be covered with 14 million names. She was thinking about the mother and her baby. She was thinking about all the species in the Concorde who had watched and done nothing. "Everywhere," she said finally. "We go everywhere." The Galactic Concorde had ruled the stars for 50,000 years. In all that time, no species had ever refused to meet them on their terms. When the Concorde called a summit, species came to the Great Hall on Nexus Prime, dressed in their finest clothes, ready to accept whatever the 12 ancient powers decided. Secretary General Daniel Price received their invitation on a quiet Tuesday morning. He read it carefully, then called Admiral Lisa Morgan and told her his plan. "They want to meet on Nexus Prime," he said. "I want to meet on Kepler-4 for 2B. Lisa was quiet for a moment. "The memorial grounds?" "Yes. If they want to negotiate with humanity, they should see what they allowed to happen. They should walk through the names of the people they let die." The Concorde ambassadors argued about the location for 2 weeks. Some said it was an insult. Some said it was a trap. Some said that humanity had lost its mind and needed to be taught a lesson. But in the end, they agreed. The human fleet was growing stronger every day, and the Concorde was running out of options. Ambassador Zethkarn of the Desolate Hegemony led the delegation. He was an old warrior who had fought in a dozen wars, a diplomat who had negotiated the surrender of 3 species. He had never been afraid of anything in his long life. But as his shuttle descended toward Kepler-4 for it to be, he felt something cold growing in his chest. The memorial grounds stretched across the entire continent. Black stone walls rose from the earth like the ribs of some vast, dead creature. On every wall, names had been carved in letters small enough that a person would have to stand close to read them. 14 million names. The Concorde ambassadors walked between the walls in silence. Surrounded by human soldiers who did not speak, Japkarn tried to count the walls and gave up after the first 100. He tried to imagine how long it would take to carve so many names, and felt his mind refuse to hold the number. He had seen death before. He had ordered death before. But he had never seen grief turned into stone like this. Daniel Price waited for them at the center of the memorial, standing beside a single wall that bore the names of children who had died in the first hour of the attack. He wore simple clothes, nothing like the elaborate robes the Concorde ambassadors expected. He looked tired. He looked old. He looked like a man who had stopped caring what anyone thought of him. "Welcome to Kepler-4 Forteby," Daniel said quietly. "I wanted you to see this before we began." Ambassador Yulvos of the Meridian Collective stepped forward. His species communicated partly through the glow of their skin, and right now that skin was flickering with colors that suggested discomfort. "This is not appropriate," Yulvos said. "A diplomatic summit should be held on neutral ground, not in a place designed to cause emotional distress." Daniel turned to look at him. "Emotional distress? Is that what you call it? I mean, no offense. But surely you understand that we cannot negotiate effectively in an environment that is meant to make us feel guilty." "Feel guilty?" Daniel's voice did not rise, but something in it made Yulvos step back. "You watched this happen. Your sensors recorded every moment. You saw the Velthary ships descending. You heard our distress calls. And you did nothing." He gestured at the walls around them. "These are not accusations. These are names. Children who had families. Parents who had dreams. People who trusted that the galaxy would not let them burn. This is not about making you feel guilty. This is about making you understand." Ambassadors were silent. Maria Santos joined Daniel at the center of the memorial. She was the lead negotiator for humanity now, a woman who had spent her life studying alien species and their tactics. She had lost her sister in the attack, but her face showed nothing. She had learned to hide her pain behind a mask of professional calm. "The Concorde has sent us a list of proposals," Maria said. "Trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, technology sharing, seats on your governing councils." She paused. "You are offering us everything we asked for 300 years ago." Ambassador Kirasol of the Luminari moved forward. Her species was made of living light, beautiful and ancient and wise. "Yes, We recognize that we made mistakes. We should have welcomed humanity sooner. We should have protected your colony. We are prepared to make amends." Maria looked at her for a long moment. Make amends. What does that mean to you? It means partnership, friendship, a place in the galactic community. And what about justice? Kirasol's light flickered with confusion. Justice. The Velthri attacked us. You did nothing. In human law, that would make you an accomplice. You watched a crime happen, and you chose not to stop it. Maria's voice was steady, but her eyes were hard. You are not offering us amends. You are offering us a bribe to forget what you did. Zethkarn stepped forward, his warrior instincts pushing through his diplomatic training. This is unreasonable. The Concord cannot be held responsible for the actions of the Velthri. We did not attack your colony. No, Daniel said. You just watched. You had the power to stop it, and you chose not to. You decided that human lives were not worth the effort of intervention. And now, you want us to pretend that did not happen? The summit continued for 4 days. The Concord offered more and more, desperate to find something that humanity would accept. They offered territory. They offered technology that they had kept secret for thousands of years. They offered to punish the Velthri, to exile them from the galactic community, to do whatever humanity wanted. Maria Santos listened to every proposal and asked the same question each time. What about the others? What others? Zethkarn asked finally, his patience wearing thin. The other species you have watched suffer? The Keth, whose world was taken by your allies. The Varani, who work as slaves in Vesselid factories. The Morith, who have been scattered across the galaxy and forbidden to remember their own culture. Maria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the walls of names. You speak of partnership, but your partnership has always meant one thing. The strong do what they want, and the weak suffer what they must. That is the galaxy you built. That is the order you maintained. And that is what we are here to end. The ambassadors looked at each other. For the first time, they understood that humanity was not fighting for revenge. They were not fighting for power or territory or wealth. They were fighting for something the Concord had never considered. The idea that no one should have to burn alone. Daniel Price stood beside Maria and looked at the ambassadors with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. You had 300 years to build a different galaxy. You had 50,000 years to decide that justice mattered more than convenience. You chose comfort instead. You chose silence. He paused. We are giving you a chance to make a different choice now. But if you refuse, we will make that choice for you. The summit ended without an agreement. The Concord returned to Nexus Prime to argue about what humanity really wanted. They would argue for months while human fleets continued to grow, the human allies continued to multiply, and on the memorial grounds of Kepler 44 to be, workers continued to carve names into black stone walls, so that the galaxy would never forget what silence had cost. The Vesselid hegemony had decided to teach humanity a lesson. Their fleet gathered at the border of human-controlled space. 2,000 warships carrying the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Admiral Zethvorn commanded the fleet from his flagship, a vessel so large it could be seen from orbit with naked eyes. He had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. He had never lost a battle. Admiral Lisa Morgan received reports of the Vesselid fleet and ordered her ships into position. The human forces were outnumbered 4-1, but Lisa did not seem worried. She had learned something important in the past year. Numbers mattered less than will, and no species in the galaxy had more will than humanity. The two fleets faced each other across empty space. Weapons charged, crews ready to die. Everyone expected the battle to begin at any moment. Everyone was wrong. A small shuttle crossed the boundary line between the fleets, flying under a flag of truce. Lisa watched it approach with curiosity. The shuttle was not the Silid. It was old and battered, patched together from parts that came from a dozen different worlds. Whoever was flying it had no business being anywhere near a battlefield. The shuttle docked with the Resolute. Lisa went down to meet its passengers. What she found surprised her more than any weapon that Thessalid could have deployed. There were 12 beings on the shuttle, representing 6 different species. None of them were Thessalid or human. They were species Lisa had read about in intelligence reports, names that appeared in footnotes of galactic history. The Keth, whose homeworld had been conquered and turned into a mining operation. The Varani, who served as slaves in Lesalid factories. The Meridian outcasts, who had been exiled from their collective for refusing to participate in wars of conquest. The Drell, whose entire species lived in refugee camps after their sun was harvested for energy. The Morith, who had been scattered across the galaxy and forbidden to speak their own language. Their leader stepped forward. He was a Keth elder named Sovan, an old male whose scales were covered in scars from decades of forced labor. His eyes were clouded with age, but his voice was clear and strong. "We have come to ask you a question," Sovan said. Lisa looked at the ragged group of beings before her. They were thin. They were tired. They were broken in ways that she could see, and probably many ways that she could not. But they had crossed a battlefield to speak with her, and that took a courage she could respect. "Ask your question. We have watched what you have done to the Velthari. We have heard the words your leaders spoke at the summit. You said that no one should have to suffer in silence. You said that the strong have an obligation to protect the weak." Sovan paused, and his voice dropped. "Did you mean it? Or were those just words for humans?" Lisa was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the walls on Kepler 4-4 to be covered with 14 million names. She thought about all the times humanity had reached out to the galaxy and received nothing but silence in return. She thought about what it felt like to be alone and afraid and forgotten. "We meant it," she said. Sovan nodded slowly. "Then we have come to ask for your help. Our peoples have been conquered, enslaved, scattered, forgotten. The Concord calls us irrelevant. They do not even remember our names. We have no weapons. We have no ships. We have nothing but the hope that somewhere in this galaxy, someone might care enough to fight for us." Lisa looked at the other beings in the shuttle. A Varani female whose hands were scarred from factory work. A young Morith who had never seen his homeworld. A Drell child who had been born in a refugee camp and knew nothing else. They were all watching her with eyes that held a desperate, fragile hope. "What do you need?" Lisa asked. "Everything," Sovan answered. "We need everything." The Coalition of the Forgotten was formed that night. Lisa sent messages to Earth, explaining what she had found and what she wanted to do. Secretary General Daniel Price read her report and gave his approval without hesitation. Humanity had learned what it felt like to be abandoned by the galaxy. They would not do the same to others. Word spread through the back channels of galactic society. In the labor camps of the Silid space, workers whispered to each other about humans who fought for people they had never met. In the refugee stations where the Drell waited to die, hope began to grow for the first time in generations. In the hidden communities where the Morith kept their language alive in secret, elders told children that help was finally coming. Human advisors traveled to 100 worlds, training resistance cells in tactics the Concord had never seen. Human engineers smuggled weapons past the solid patrols. Human doctors set up clinics in refugee camps, treating diseases that the Concord had not bothered to cure. Human teachers taught the Morith language to children who had never heard it spoken aloud. Commander Kaven Park led the first joint operation, the liberation of the Keth homeworld. His force was small by galactic standards, just 50 human ships and a handful of vessels crewed by coalition species. They faced a Veselid garrison of 300 warships and 50,000 soldiers. The battle lasted 3 days. Kevin used tactics that the Veselid had never encountered, striking from unexpected angles, retreating when they expected him to advance, advancing when they expected him to retreat. His coalition allies fought with a fury that surprised everyone, including themselves. They were fighting for their homes, their families, their right to exist. They were fighting for everything the Concord had taken from them. On the 3rd day, the Veselid commander requested terms of surrender. Kevin accepted, but he made one demand that was not negotiable. Every Keth who had been taken as a slave would be returned home. When the Veselid flag came down and the Keth banner rose in its place, The cheering could be heard across the star system. Sovin stood beside Kevin on the surface of a world he had not seen since he was a child. Watching his people celebrate their freedom, tears ran down his scarred face. "Why?" Sovin asked. "Your soldiers died today. Humans died for a world that is not theirs, for a people they had never met. Why would you do this?" Kevin thought about the question for a long time. He thought about his friends who had died on Kepler 4b. He thought about the silence that had followed, the endless, crushing silence of a galaxy that did not care. "Because no one did it for us," he said finally. "When we needed help, the galaxy looked away. We remember what that felt like. We will not let it happen to anyone else." The liberation of the Keth homeworld was just the beginning. Over the next year, coalition forces freed a dozen worlds. The Varani factories were shut down, their workers given the choice to stay or go home. The Drell refugees were given ships and supplies and the chance to find a new world of their own. The Morith were gathered from their scattered communities and returned to their homeworld, where they could rebuild their culture in peace. The Concord watched these events with growing alarm. Ambassador Zethkarn sent message after message demanding that humanity explain itself. What right did humans have to interfere in galactic affairs? What right did they have to overturn the established order? Maria Santos answered him with 3 words: "Watch us." The coalition grew stronger with each passing month. Species that had been forgotten for centuries joined the fight. Species that had accepted their fate as slaves or refugees found the urge to demand something better. And at the center of it all were the humans, who had learned the hard way that justice did not happen by itself. Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the Resolute and watched. Coalition ships practicing maneuvers alongside human vessels, Keth warriors trained beside human marines. Varani engineers worked with human technicians. Morith poets wrote songs about battles they had never imagined they would fight. "We are changing the galaxy," her aide said quietly. Lisa nodded. "Yes, we are. And we are just getting started." The Galactic Concord was dying, and everyone knew it. For 50,000 years, 12 ancient species had ruled the stars through a simple principle. The strong did what they wanted, and the weak accepted what they were given. Now that principle was being torn apart by humans who refused to accept it, and by the countless forgotten. Species who had found the courage to stand beside them. Ambassador Carousel of the Luminari led the final delegation to Earth. She was the oldest member of the Concord, a being of pure light who had watched civilizations rise and fall for longer than humans had existed. She had opposed the intervention against humanity from the beginning. She had argued that ignoring the colony attack was a mistake. No one had listened to her then. Now they were sending her to fix a disaster that might be too far gone to repair. Secretary General Daniel Price received her in his office in Geneva. He was older now, his hair completely white, his face lined with years of war and grief. But his eyes were still sharp, and his voice was still strong. "You have come to ask for peace," Daniel said. It was not a question, yes. Curacaw's light flickered with emotions that humans could not read. "The Concord is prepared to accept any terms you wish. We will dissolve our alliance if that is what you want. We will punish the species who opposed you. We will do anything." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Outside his window, he could see the city that had been rebuilt after the HFY War. Children played in parks that had once been craters. Families walked along streets that had once been filled with rubble. Life had continued, as it always did. "You speak of peace," Daniel said finally. "But I wonder if you understand what that word means to us." "I am not sure I do," Carousel admitted. "For 300 years, you had peace. Your species prospered while others suffered. Your worlds grew wealthy while the Keth were enslaved and the Varani were worked to death, and the Morith were scattered like leaves in the wind. That was your peace." Daniel stood and walked to the window. "We are not fighting to end your peace. We are fighting to build something better. What would you have us do?" Daniel turned to face her. "There is a species called the Jannari. Their world was sterilized by the Meridian Collective 2 centuries ago because they refused to surrender their technology. The survivors have been living on a moon at the edge of known space, slowly dying out. Your peace allowed that to happen. Kurisal's light dimmed with something that might have been shame. Tomorrow, human ships will escort the Janari home. We will help them terraform their world and rebuild their civilization. The Meridian Collective will pay for the restoration, whether they agree or not. Daniel paused. That is what we would have you do. Not end the war, help us win it. The final phase of the war lasted 3 years. It was not a war of conquest, but a war of liberation. System by system, the coalition freed the enslaved and protected the vulnerable. Species that had been forgotten for centuries were given the chance to rebuild. Species that had prospered through cruelty were forced to pay for the damage they had caused. The Concord fought back at first. The Vesselid hegemony refused to release their slaves. The Meridian Collective refused to pay reparations. The others argued and delayed in hope that humanity would eventually get tired and give up. They did not understand humans at all, Commander. Kevin Park led the assault on the Vesselid homeworld. The battle was long and bloody, but in the end, the hegemony fell. The slaves were freed. The generals who had ordered the attacks on coalition worlds were tried for their crimes. Ambassador Zethkarn, who had once mocked the idea of human justice, was sentenced to spend the rest of his life helping rebuild the worlds his people had. Destroyed Maria Santos negotiated the surrender of the Meridian Collective. She did not ask for territory or tribute. She asked only that they release the species they had conquered and help repair the damage they had done. When the Collective refused, she showed them what would happen if they continued to resist. They surrendered the next day. One by one, the members of the old Concord accepted the new reality. Some joined the coalition willingly, recognizing that the old way was over. Others had to be forced. But in the end, they all understood that the galaxy had changed forever. On the day the new Galactic Charter was signed, representatives from 47 species gathered in a hall built on neutral ground. The hall was located on a world that had once been barren rock, transformed by the combined effort of a dozen species into a garden of impossible beauty. It was meant to represent what the galaxy could become when people worked together, instead of against each other. Daniel Price signed the charter first. His hand shook slightly, the tremor of age that he could no longer hide. But his signature was clear and strong. Behind him stood Lisa Morgan, now retired from the military, and Kevin Park, now an ambassador himself. Behind them stood Sovan of the Keth, and leaders of a dozen other species who had once been forgotten. The charter established principles that the old Concord had never imagined. Every species had the right to self-determination. Every species had the right to their own world, their own culture, their own future. The strong had an obligation to protect the weak. No world would ever burn alone again. It was not perfect. Nothing built by living beings could ever be perfect. There would be arguments and conflicts and disappointments. There would be species who tried to cheat the system and leaders who forgot their principles. The work of building a just galaxy would never truly be finished, but it was a beginning. Lisa Morgan watched the ceremony from the observation, a gallery. Beside her stood Sovan, whose people had finally returned home after generations of slavery. The old Keth's scales were still scarred, but his eyes were bright with hope. They will say that humanity conquered the galaxy, Sovan said quietly. Lisa shook her head. We did not conquer it. We just refused to accept a galaxy that watched children burn and called it peace. Everything else followed from that. But why? Sovan asked. You could have built an empire. You could have ruled as the Concord ruled. No one would have blamed you after what was done to your people. Lisa thought about the question for a long time. She thought about the walls on Kepler 4-4 to be covered with 14 million names. She thought about the mother who had tried to shield her baby. She thought about all the people who had died believing that the galaxy would save them. Because that is not who we are, she said finally. We spent 300 years asking the galaxy to be kind to us. When they refused, we could have become like them. We could have decided that cruelty was the only way to survive. She paused. But we remembered what it felt like to be forgotten. We remembered what it felt like to burn alone. And we decided that we would rather die than become the kind of people who let that happen to others. Sovan was silent for a moment. Then he reached out and touched Lisa's hand with his scarred fingers. "The galaxy was wrong about humanity," he said. "They thought you were weak because you asked for friendship. They thought you were foolish because you believed in kindness. They did not understand that those were the things that made you strong." Lisa smiled, the first real smile she had felt in years. No, they did not understand. But they do now. Below them, the new Galactic Council was holding its first session. Human delegates sat beside Keth elders and Varani, representatives and Morith poets. The forgotten had become the foundation. The silence had been replaced with voices that would never be ignored again, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a small ship carried a message that would be broadcast to every world in the galaxy. It was a simple message. It was a hopeful message. It said that humanity wanted to be friends with whoever was listening. This time, someone answered,